Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on community facilities. My name is Sean Robbins, and I am the Policy Associate here at the Association of Community College Trustees, leading our Strengthening Rural Community Colleges initiative. I'm excited to be leading this work and partnering with the Rural Community College Alliance to provide support to all of our rural community colleges. Before we get started, I just want to share a little bit of a glimpse of where folks are coming from today. So this is our breakdown of the registration by our ACCT regions. And as we can see, we have the 24 institutions that are being represented in our southern region that are in attendance today, and pretty much a similar breakdown across the board there from our other regions. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are excited for today's conversation. Throughout the webinar, feel free to utilize the chats for any questions that you may have. And also don't forget to introduce yourself as well. As a note, we are recording today's webinar, and we'll have the recording available within the next week for you to watch as well. And today we are joined by Jamie Davenport from the USDA Rural Development. Jamie Davenport is a special projects coordinator for USDA's Community Facilities Program. The Community Facilities Program provides affordable loan and grant funding to support the creation and improvement of essential community facilities. Jamie previously served as Director of Partnerships in the Rural Development Initiative Center, promoting cross-agency collaborations and identifying best practices in economic development. Before joining Rural Development, Jamie spent 8 years as the Small Business Administration, where she managed loan and grant programs to increase access to capital among underserved populations. Originally from Illinois, she received her master's in public administration from Virginia Tech and her bachelor's in economics from Illinois Wesleyan University. And without further ado, I will hand things over to Jamie. So thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Sean. Thanks for having me. It's great. There are so many colleges represented across the country. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that okay? Oh.
There we go.
Are we good? Are we good, Sean? Okay. All right, just getting myself situated here. All right, well, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I understand there's interest in learning about infrastructure financing at rural development for community colleges. So I'm happy to help share that with you today. We'll talk about things like college dorms and then also touch on some smaller scale projects as well. I wanted to start today by talking a little bit about USDA Rural Development in case you're not already working with us or familiar with our programs. But Rural Development offers more than 40 loan, grant, and technical assistance programs to support economic development in rural communities. And these programs are broken down into these broad areas. The telecommunications program includes a funding for broadband, also includes a grant program for distance learning. Our electric programs provides financing for electric cooperatives, as well as energy savings programs. Community facilities, where I work, we'll dive into that more here in a minute. Our water and environmental programs offers loans, grants, and loan guarantees to support water and sewer infrastructure. And business and cooperative programs provides financing for businesses and industries in rural areas, including some technical assistance opportunities and supporting things like cooperative development and local food type projects. And then finally, we have single family housing and multi-family housing programs available as well. So again, a lot of programs, about 40 programs spread across rural development, really touching just about all aspects of economic development for our rural communities. And also I want to mention rural communities. So we say that all the time. Unfortunately, if you're familiar with RD, you may already know that each program has its own definition of what rural means. And that's just the way the programs were established by statute. And so each program, as we go through them, we'll talk about what those population limits are. We also have a handy matrix resource document that gives a quick overview of each of those 40 programs across the agency. I refer to that constantly to get information on population or eligible applicants, use of funds, eligible areas. That I find that to be a very helpful resource myself. And so I always try to share that with organizations that I meet with. So I'll provide that to Sean, or if I can find the link online, I'll put it in the chat box because that may also be helpful to you. All total across RD, we invest about $28 billion each year into these programs. Our total portfolio consists of about $250 billion. For the community facilities program itself, we have about a $12 billion program that's across loans and grants. And almost a quarter of that, almost $4 billion of that is education related. And so we looked at the data on how that education funds have been spent, and we can share that with you today. So next are the agencies. The programs are delivered through 3 agencies: the Rural Business Cooperative Service, the Rural Housing Service, and the Rural Utilities Service. And the Community Facilities Program itself is managed out of the Rural Housing Service. Our headquarters is in Washington, D.C., but most of our programs are really delivered through our state and area offices. And so I want to put in a plug now right away for each of our rural development state offices. Most of the programs, with the exception of some of the grant programs and some of the utility programs, particularly around electric cooperatives and broadband, that's based out of the national office. Otherwise, most of the RD programs are really run out of the state offices. And this consists of 47 state offices and then 400 smaller local area offices around the country. And those local area offices, they have staff on the ground assisting in the development of projects, really from start to end. So staff are available to help you, think through potential projects that you're looking at and what programs might be available within RD to help support your needs. Most states have their own office. There are some states in the Northeast that share a state office just based on the size of those offices. So Vermont, New Hampshire share a state office, and Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, they also share an office. Each of these state offices are overseen by a rural development state director. And these are political positions appointed by each presidential administration. And then reporting to those state directors are community program directors, in our case for our program in community facilities. But we have community program directors in each of those state offices that manage and oversee the CF loan and grant programs. If you don't have a relationship yet with the state or an area office near you, I definitely encourage you to reach out and talk about your college and maybe what projects you might be interested in or thinking about. If what you hear today is you think might be of interest, might be useful to your college. You can find the contact information on the website here on the screen, or you're welcome to reach out to me, and I can connect you via email to staff located there in the state where you are. So if we start talking about community facilities itself, under the CF program, we provide loans, grants, and loan guarantees to develop or improve public services and public facilities in rural communities. The purpose of the funding is for the construction or expansion or renovation of essential community facilities, or to purchase things like equipment or vehicles to support those facilities. For the most part, our investments are for hard assets. We're not funding things like operations. So most of the funding is going toward those hard asset type items. There's a vast array of facilities. Some of us talk about how the programs can support more than 100 different types of essential community facilities. About half of that is, half of our portfolio is concentrated in the healthcare sector. We provide funding to rural clinics, hospitals, assisted living facilities, ambulances, substance use disorder treatment facilities, dental clinics. I mean, it just goes on and on. So about half of the portfolio is concentrated in those types of entities. The next concentration of our portfolio is really within the education and cultural facilities area. So that includes colleges, K through 12 schools, museums, libraries, and childcare facilities as well. We also fund projects such as town halls, fire stations, courthouses, and community centers. We could go on and on with some examples of the types of facilities that we serve. Eligible applicants under the program include public bodies, nonprofits, or Native American federally recognized tribes. Here is just a breakdown of the distribution of the portfolio itself. As I mentioned, it's about a $12 billion portfolio, half of that being in healthcare, and then just under $4 billion in education. The vast majority of this funding is concentrated in loans, loan funding. We get more than $2 billion in loan funding each year, which has been more than, we have plenty of loan funds available. So that's been more than we need to meet the type of demand that we typically see in a year. We have plenty of funds available. The grant funding is much more limited. We typically get about $30 million each year in grant funding. So that's for, all of these sectors. That $30 million in grant funding gets allocated out to each of our state offices to award. So typically each state office is getting between $500,000 and $1 million in grant funding. So the funds are fairly limited. We do have a couple grant funds that we'll talk about some of the grant programs here in a little bit. So I did look at the education portfolio itself to get more of a breakdown in terms of how those funds have been used. So you'll see it's really across all sectors of education. And this is all based on the NAICS code of the project that we're funding. So the primary purpose of the project that we're funding. The vast majority of the community facility funding goes to support all-purpose campus buildings like administration buildings, classroom space. Next is charter school funding. We have a sizable group of charter school projects in the portfolio. Then K through 12 public schools, and then here we get into the college funding. And I know college dorms are of interest. About 8% of the portfolio is of the education portfolio. So not the portfolio overall, but 8% of the education funding is in college dorms. And right now it's about $290 million, I believe, that we have invested in dorms across the country. And that's not just community colleges, that's four-year colleges as well. So if we talk more about who's eligible, Eligible applicants include public bodies, nonprofits, and tribes. In the community college space, we have some colleges that are organized as public bodies, some that are set up as nonprofit, and we've seen some tribal colleges come in too, of course. We fund a lot of tribal colleges or federally recognized tribes assisting those facilities. The eligible areas for our direct loans and grants include communities of 20,000 or less in population. The facility that we're serving, that we're funding, must be located in a town, city, or village of 20,000 or less, or located in an unincorporated area. There is another, I told you earlier, we have different definitions by program. We also have our guarantee program, which is a loan between the college institution and a private commercial lender, and we guarantee against any loss that the lender may experience. Under the guarantee program, we can serve facilities located in communities of 50,000 or less. So typically for our education projects, the guarantee projects that we see fall into that higher population range, higher than 20 and less than 50,000. Eligible applicants also must primarily serve rural residents. So if your college, for instance, is located next to a large city, we'd be looking at the student body of your college to be sure that it's primarily serving rural residents. So primarily serving rural residents is a requirement across our program. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of flexibility with the population requirements of the program because those are set by the statute establishing the program. Within the last year or so, though, there was a change in the law to remove prison populations, to exclude prison populations from those population counts. So that provided those communities with a bit more flexibility. Finally, I want to point out that we have a test for other credit requirement. If your institution is able to finance the project through other sources, such as commercial credit on reasonable terms, then we're unable to provide the financing. Essentially, we're not competing with the commercial credit providers. So we're here to fill a gap when an institution, an essential community facility, is otherwise unable to obtain funding from those traditional lenders. Then that's when we can step in to fill that gap. On the direct loans, CF direct loans, again, because of the amount of funding that we have available, this is where most of our interest is from. This is where most of our activity across the program is concentrated. The direct loans provide fixed rate financing. After record low rates, we're now, of course, seeing increases like everywhere else in the interest rate. This quarter, the interest rate is set at 3.25%, so 3.25%. That was an increase from the prior quarter when it was at 2.5%. So we are seeing those same increases, and the next potential change would come in October. The term of the loan is 40 years or for the useful life of the project. Typically on a construction of a facility, we'd see terms of 30 to 35 years. If it's something smaller like buses or vehicles, then of course the term changes and goes down to 15 or so years, depending on whatever is most appropriate. We do require adequate security for the loan. So for public bodies, typically we're looking for some type of general obligation or revenue bond or a lien on the facility that's constructed or renovated. We really work with the applicant to determine the best collateral that's available. And of course, that differs by jurisdiction depending on the laws or your own incorporating documents. So we work with you to see what is the best available collateral. Finally, we look at repayment ability. We do a fairly significant underwriting analysis of the financial capability of the organization that we're lending to ensure repayment. We do look at feasibility studies, look at projections for colleges. We definitely be looking at historical enrollment compared to projected enrollment to ensure that the loan can be repaid over time. To support our direct loan program, this is another resource that I wanted to highlight. A few years ago, our CF team put together this resource document that's available on our website, and I can give it to Sean as a follow-up here today. But we put together this resource document that provides a step-by-step guide on what to expect when applying for a direct loan. These are a dorm or a new classroom building. These are big projects. We didn't talk about the size of the projects. The maximum size is $100 million typically. So for like our hospitals and stuff, we start to get into those really big amounts. Typically our direct loans, I don't know the average offhand, but a couple $1 million or around $1 million, depending on the facility that's being constructed. But this guidance handbook is really helpful at walking you through the steps and thinking about the timeline for these projects because of everything that is entailed, whether it be looking at environmental reviews for the project, environmental impacts. We look at all the architectural reports, the feasibility studies, and so that document outlines what those different requirements are and what to expect. Okay, so the grant program. I pulled out 3 of our grant programs to highlight for you today. The first is what we refer to as CF regular grants. These are our regular normal grants. As I wrote that, I thought that's a funny way of us calling it that, but our regular grants. We typically receive about $30 million in funding for our regular grants each year. There are some more eligibility requirements. It says here same eligibility requirements, but as a direct loan program, but I want to highlight one difference in particular, and that's related to median household income of a facility's service area. And this is important to know right off the bat. This can be a disqualifier for organizations. So you want to work with your local RD office early on to discuss this requirement. We fund a portion of project costs. We don't fund 100% of projects with grant funding. It typically ranges from 35 to 75% of the total project costs. And the percent that we cover in grant funding is based on population and MHI. So projects that are located in the smallest communities, less than 5,000 population, and facilities that serve communities with the lowest median household income, those projects are eligible for larger portions of the grant, up to 75%. The maximum MHI that we can fund with a grant is for a facility that serves, the service area has an MHI of more than 90% of a statewide non-metro median household income. It's a real mouthful for me to say, but we look at the facilities service area. So not just the community where it's the college might be located, but the service area where that college is serving, and determine what the median household income of that service area is. And then we compare it to a statewide average. So of the non-metropolitan areas. So please, if you think you might be interested in this, it's worth talking to the state office early to verify your eligibility for the program. The grant funds are awarded competitively with priority points going toward depending on the location and service area of a project, whether it might be serving like a distressed community or persistent poverty community, things like that. Last year, our average grant size was about $40,000. And so these go to fund things like equipment and vehicles most frequently. So it could be like buses, for instance, for schools, maybe laboratory equipment in schools, that type of thing. And then I also wanted to touch on the Emergency Rural Healthcare Program. This is a new program. It was part of the American Rescue Plan Act that was signed last year to provide COVID relief. And this program provides grant funding to support access to COVID vaccines, COVID testing, increase access to healthcare services, as well as food assistance in rural communities. Normally we get $30 million in grant funding. This gave us $500 million. So this is just a huge increase for us. Most of my time the last year has been spent on this program. So we have two tracks of funding. Track 2, we're no longer accepting applications for, but we are for track 1. And these are recovery grants up to $1 million to support immediate needs around testing, vaccines, and access to healthcare and nutrition. So awards range from $25,000 to $1 million. The projects have to be related to the pandemic. So each of the use of funds have to be tied back to the pandemic. And the reason I bring it up is that we've had some questions from K through 12 schools in particular about like school nurse facilities, the health units at those schools, and whether they might be eligible for funding. And that is a possibility. So I wanted to share that with you too for your health units that you might have on your campus. The funds have to be related to COVID, and they have to be related to the provision of healthcare services. But if your health unit or your health service has some expenses related to the pandemic that otherwise haven't already been funded, you may want to look into this opportunity further. We did allocate the funding to each of the state offices for the track 1 funding. We provided $350 million available under that track 1. So far, we've obligated about $150 million of that. So we seem to still have quite a bit of funding remaining, although we have a kind of staggered deadlines. We'll know much better next month how much funding we really have available. But if this is something that interests you, or maybe you think it might help another organization in your community, please share and reach out to your state office. And then finally, I wanted to talk about the Rural Community Development Initiative, or RCDI. So this is a grant program that's already closed for this fiscal year, but might be something that you want to consider in future years. And Sean, I think we should flag this so we make sure we share information with you next spring. Typically, we open up the application round in the spring each year, and we typically get about $6 million that's available. Under RCDI, we provide grants to organizations to provide technical assistance to build the capacity of nonprofits, low-income communities, or federally recognized tribes. It's a train-the-trainer type concept. We provide funding to an organization that serves as an intermediary, and then that intermediary provides training to recipients that are organized as public bodies, nonprofits, or tribes. And then those recipients of that training, they then turn around and provide training to ultimate beneficiaries in their community. And those ultimate beneficiaries, they might be prospective home buyers, small businesses, or child care providers. The funding can be used to support training like board development, leadership development, or help support strategic planning resources. So I just wanted to bring it up. I thought that might be of interest to community colleges. We have not had a community college. We looked back at the recipients of awards, and it's been many, many years since we've had a community college, I believe, that has been selected for an award. But that, I think, should be an opportunity to consider potentially for the future. If you provide if you're already doing some type of development in your community with other partners. There are some limitations in terms of like organizational history and matching funds. In order to apply for the program, the intermediary that's applying must have at least 3 years of experience, and must also have at least 3 years of experience of working with the type of eligible recipients for this program. So it's not for a brand new concept, I would say. Matching funds, it does require a dollar for dollar match. Last year, so typically, again, we get about $6 million each year. We announced it in the spring. Last year, we did not award all of the available funding. So we didn't get enough applications to utilize that full amount of the funding. So that's in particular why I wanted to share it. It's not as competitive as it has been in the past. So that may change again, but we want to try and expand our outreach for that program. And then now I'd love to share some examples of projects that we have supported for community colleges, and would also love to hear from you participating on the call. If you have you worked with RD in the past, or if you have potential projects that you're thinking about, would love to hear about that. Maybe include it in the chat. But our first project might not be new to you, and we might have someone from the college on the call. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong or add any additional details. We'd love to hear from you. But this is a project in Glen Oaks Community College in Southwest Michigan. Glen Oaks is in Southwest Michigan and initially came to RD for a $6.5 million direct loan for a college dorm. The college didn't have student housing before this project, and I understand it really changed the dynamic of the college, of the campus itself, by being able to offer this new service to students from the community as well as outside of the community area. RD was involved from the project and since the beginning, when the college was first planning for the investment and completing like feasibility studies, various studies necessary to demonstrate the design and environmental requirements of the project could be met, and that repayment was feasible through student rent for the project. After the $6.5 million college dorm project, then the university or college requested and received $2.2 million CF direct loan for renovation of the student concourse, or like a student center. So this project allowed for renovation of a 50-year-old building and provided new and improved meeting space, dining space for the college community. I didn't work on these projects myself, but these are just some of the examples in our portfolio that we found, and some that we love to talk about to show how our funds can be used. So if we have someone from Glen Oaks, would be happy for you to share more. The next project is Bay Mills Community College. Bay Mills is a 1994 land grant tribal college in Michigan. They have been the recipient of tribal grant funding for years. So I didn't mention the CF tribal grant, tribal college funding, but we have funding each year specific for tribal colleges. And those are designated 1994 land grant tribal colleges. And so what we do is when we receive that funding, we contact each of those colleges to determine if they're interested in grant funding, if they have an eligible project, and then we work with them to make those awards. But it's very limited in terms of the applicant pool for that program. So Bay Mills has had a relationship with RD for many, many years through that tribal college program. And this is their first CF direct loan project. And it was a $7.5 million project for construction of a new facility here on the water. This is a new administration and classroom building. It replaced an old building that had originally been used as a fish processing plant. So I imagine there was a need for quite a bit of improvements for the college. But this new facility added more classrooms as well as central meeting spaces, gathering places for events like graduation and conferences and events for the community to participate in. And then finally, Cankdeska Cikana Community College in North Dakota. Another tribal land grant college received $7.6 million in CF direct funding for the construction of a Head Start facility. This was a partnership between the college and the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe in North Dakota. The project included a $900,000 grant from Head Start, and the remainder of the funding came from USDA. There had been a child care facility run by the tribe, but there have been a series of health and safety issues with that existing facility. And so the tribe worked with the community college on another solution. And the college had its own existing smaller facility for childcare. And the two came together then to work on this project, providing a larger new facility to accommodate children from both communities. It's built on land leased from the tribe in Fort Totten, North Dakota for the duration of the loan. And this daycare facility serves more than 100 kids. So that's my presentation overview of the programs that we have available. I'm happy to get to your questions now and see what else I can help provide.
Thank you so much, Jamie. We do have a couple questions in the chat, and folks, feel free while we answer these questions to put in your other questions that you might have into the chat as well. We had just a clarifying question in terms of how much individual is wondering how much each state is getting in grant funding to be able to award.
So typically for the regular grants, they receive between $500,000 and about $1 million in grant funding. It depends on the population and income of the states. There's a formula to distribute that funding. Typically the grant funding is utilized by, we end up spending our grant funding each year. We do establish a deadline though by when, if the state hasn't utilized their funding, we pool those funds into a what we call a national office reserve and then compete it to other projects that weren't able to receive funding in other states. But typically states get between 500,000 and $1 million. With the new healthcare program, that increased substantially, but that's specific to the healthcare program. But for that, some states received as much as 12 or $15 million to be able to award in their states.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got another question here. Does USDA Rural Development provide any grant for the establishment of innovation and entrepreneurship programs?
So I'm not as familiar, but our Rural Business Cooperative Service Agency within the last couple years has rolled out some new programs that I can't speak very well to, but I would look there on our website, or if you reach out to me, I can share with you. We have, I don't even know what the acronyms stand for, so I don't want to misspeak. But yeah, in our business area, there are some new programs around like innovation and like cluster type support.
Great. Is there a presumption that regular grants should cover a minimum of 35% of the total project, or is it common to say have a 40,000 grant towards a $400,000 project?
It's not certainly not a normal occurrence or requirement. We do have some projects that have like a loan grant combination, where a portion of the project costs would be supported with a grant and the rest in a loan. But it depends on like I said, the population and MHI of the community, if you're eligible for grant funding. Also, we look at what an applicant is contributing toward a project to determine what grant funding is eligible. So certainly it's not, I wouldn't say it's normal to have a grant coupled with a loan. I think it's more typical to have a loan only project or smaller grants just for the equipment purposes. But sometimes that's the case. It just depends on the service area of your facility, as well as your own institution's kind of financial, like what you have available to help support the project.
Okay. Got another question coming in. Is the RFA currently available, and when is the deadline? I think you had mentioned a little bit for a couple aspects. If you can just talk a little bit more there.
Yep. So for the grant program, the regular grant program, so the $30 million that we receive each year, that is available on a continuous rolling basis. So we don't have a specific application window. We review those as we receive them. And so for that, you can look at our website in terms of, you know, who to contact to find out what information you should submit. It's very much working with the state office or area office on compiling the information needed for the grant. So it's very much working together on it rather than you submitting like an application package on your own and we score it and evaluate it. It's not that. On the emergency rural healthcare program, that is a little bit different. That one, we issued a notice of funding availability in August of 2021. And so that's on our website. It was published in the Federal Register, announcing, because this was a brand new program. So we had to establish all of the eligibility criteria, use of funds criteria. And so that NOFA, the notice of funds availability, spells all that out and discusses the timelines as well. So that information is available on our website, and I can share it with Sean after as well.
Wonderful. Let's see. To answer the last couple questions that have come through, I'll share out some of the last resources, that contact information in the chat in just a moment. And the presentation, the recording itself, and these resources will have those all available on our websites within the next week. Do we have other questions from folks? If so, feel free to put those into the chat.
Or have any of you received funding from RD in the past?
Oh, there's another question that came through. How does USDA keep ownership interest?
So we file, like for our loans, we'll file a lien throughout the period of the loan. So typically we would have a lien on the facility. Depending on the larger grants, just through the healthcare program, now we're starting to see some healthcare in particular, like grants to hospitals for facilities, where we file a notice of federal interest showing for the useful life of the facility that we do retain an interest in that facility to ensure that it continues to be used as the purpose by which it received funds. But for the loans, that's typically through like filing a lien on the property.
Okay. Got another one coming through. Is the Track 1 grants opportunities that you spoke about earlier first released in August of 2021? And also wondering the formal name of that again.
Yep, so that's correct. So it's Track 1 recovery grants. Those are the grants from $25,000 to $1 million to support kind of immediate equipment needs, like to support vaccines and testing. It also, there's a lost revenue component for healthcare facilities in terms of lost healthcare revenue throughout the pandemic. We can cover a portion of that if it's not already covered through like HHS or SBA funds. We also can provide funding for staffing, for instance, nurses to administer tests or vaccines. But that is all under Track 1 recovery grants. We provided up to $350 million available for that purpose. And that's where we'll continue. The funds legally, according to the Act, they're available until September of 2023, or until we run out of funds. So we anticipate we will run out of funds before September of 23. And I can't tell you, right now we've obligated about $150 million. So it appears we still have a significant amount of funds available, but states also have a deadline next month to submit all of those awards to us. So we don't have the full information yet.
Thank you. Any other questions that folks might have? Well, while you are thinking, are there any other tips or best practice or recommendations that you can provide for our rural community college leaders while they are looking through these various aspects? I know you had mentioned to reach out to their specific state office, but is there anything else that you would also be able to recommend, or tips or tricks of the trade while they're looking at things?
Definitely reaching out to our staff, to talk about your projects. We have staff that can help you walk through the process. You're working on it together. We have those resources. I'm based out of our headquarters in Washington, D.C. So as I said, I can certainly help connect you with the states. But those are great resources to go to. Also, I would say kind of bigger picture outside of just community facilities funding, but recognizing kind of the anchor institution type role that community colleges often play. One of the biggest challenges that we see among our, potential applicants in rural communities is that they don't know what's available. You saw like 40 programs, loans, grants, loan guarantees. It's a lot of information. And as new bills are passed, and particularly with COVID, we've had new programs released. It's hard to keep up on all that information about those resources that are available. So we really need help sharing that information with your community partners. So outside of just the education field, but letting them know, the volunteer fire stations, the small clinics, letting them know what types of resources are available is very helpful.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that's there's been a lot of great resources and information. I'm sure folks will be able to dive into some of these here to see about some opportunities that they might be able to further dive into and possibly apply towards. So I want to just give one quick call. Is there any last questions that we might have here for Jamie? All right. Well, thank you, Jamie, so much for joining us today and providing these wonderful resources. I'm sure that we just with all the questions that we've had here, I'm sure that folks are very interested in diving into some of these resources. And so thank you everybody else for joining us here today. I want to just put a plug in for our upcoming webinars and peer learning networks that we have. So please feel free to check out our webpage. That's also where we're going to be putting up this recording. So the URL is right there in the chat. Also, in looking forward, on July 27th, we'll be continuing this conversation through our peer learning network discussion, where we're going to be joined by Colby Community College and Wiregrass Georgia Technical College. They will be sharing their institution's experience as community facilities grants recipients. So be sure to register there with the link in the chat. And then additionally, our next webinar is going to be next month on Wednesday, August 17th. And the topic, I'm really excited about this, is going to be on protecting the mental health of rural community college students, creative innovations in challenging times. So please be sure to sign up for that as well. And we are going to be looking forward to seeing you then for our next peer learning network and our next webinar. So thank you again for joining us today for our webinar on community facilities. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, take care.